Hello from London. It's a pleasure to take you on a tour today of 9 regions of the world and 30 solar farms to see for ourselves the great progress being made in global solar, but also the challenges. Let's start today by simply, for those who are not all fully familiar with the solar potential of all the continents, and look at where the sun shines and where it doesn't, because what you see on screen is by far the best distribution of all 7 of the primary energies which keep the world going. It is widely distributed. If we for a moment look at the areas that are marked with a red dot, you can see in those areas an installed kilowatt on a daily basis produces about 5 kilowatt hours of solar electricity. If you look at the areas marked in yellow, you can see that produces only 4 kilowatt hours per kilowatt installed per day. And in the green areas, such as Europe and China and Japan, you can see it only produces about 2.8, half what we saw earlier. And let's now go look at the world, and we will start our tour today in China, then go to Japan, Australia, India, the Middle East, Africa, go to Europe, the United States of America, and finish our tour today in sunny desert Chile. China has the largest installed solar capacity in the world, and each tile that you see here, courtesy of Wikisolar, is a solar farm spread across the country. Large solar farms are often located in deserts, as we will see, and in mountains, because these are the only places where land is available. And as we will see, China is becoming and has become the solar panel factory of the world. But before we start our tour, let's just see where Chinese electricity comes from. We can see quite clearly on screen, coal dominates, followed by hydro in blue at the top. There's considerable growth in renewables in the past decade, and you can see that solar is now 5% of Chinese power generation. Our first visit to a solar farm in China is this one, and this is, if you're not aware of its existence, is the Gonghe Talatan solar farm with a combined capacity that you can see on your screen of 9,000 megawatts. That area that you see is 600 square kilometers, and yes, it's a moot point for those who are in the solar industry, whether that's one solar farm or many solar farms, but the combined capacity to its claim that it's the largest in the world is 9,000. What is significant is that when the Wangi hydropower began work on this plant in 2012, they sowed grass to protect the solar panels from the harsh wind and sandstorms. And today the runoff from cleaning it with water causes grass to grow, and they now have tamed the area with sheep farming in the area. Our second visit in China is this one to Datong. And we look at Datong because it is completely built in mountainous regions. Land is short in China. And you can see that each of the red dots is a major solar set of panels against a mountain slope to try and find land in the northeastern China. Our third one is the Yangshi Nixia solar farm, which is a demonstration of multi-use of land to farm under the panels with goji berries, and the locals can now farm and then harvest goji berries all year round as a benefit from a solar farm. And our last Chinese solar farm is this one, which is following the steps and the progress in Japan. China is now developing floating solar on a gigantic scale. This is 40 megawatts from 160,000 floating panels on an old abandoned coal mine. And they can also fish farm in this coal mine. So a multi-purpose facility in China. I said earlier that that China today is the solar panel factory of the world. And China, in fact, boasts 6 of the 10 largest solar panel manufacturers. And you can see their headquarters in Beijing for JA Solar, in Xi'an for Longi, Suntec is in Wuxi, Trina Solar in Zhangzhou, Jinko Solar in Shanghai, and Ryzen in Ningbo. And solar PV manufacturing capacity has increasingly moved from Europe and Japan and the United States to China over the last decade. China has invested $50 billion in new PV supply capacity, 10 times that of Europe, and created more than 300,000 manufacturing jobs since 2011. And today, China shared in all the manufacturing stages of solar panels, such as polysilicon and ingots and wafers and cells and modules, exceeds 80% of world capacity. And that capacity is twice China's own needs, so the other half is there for export. And China, in this way, brought down cost of solar worldwide. At the same time, as we will see when we get to the United States, the level of geographical concentration and the geopolitical implications also creates potential challenges that governments need to address. And both Europe and the USA have done so, but remain concerned about China concentration. And let's remind ourselves that the manufacturing of these panels is high tech. And here you see robots manufacturing solar panels at the Jinko panel factory in Beijing. Before we leave China, let's just take stock of where solar fits into the overall Chinese primary energy consumption, all drawn to the same scale. And what you see at the bottom middle quite clearly is how coal dominates in the country, how oil and gas are comparatively small, hydropower is small, and that solar today produces 2% of the primary energy in China. We leave China and go across the East China Sea and the Sea of Japan to Japan, a country that has worked hard to both create a solar panel industry and solar power plants. And we will see, as we look at each of the solar plants across from Hokkaido Island in the north to Futsu in the south, through Honshu in the middle, that land is expensive for solar. And on top of that, the 50 and 60-year grids in Japan are quite congested. We can see here in the dark blue that declined in 2011 when Fukushima happened, the tragedy of nuclear, and you can see that coal and gas are the anchors of the Japanese power system at the bottom of the graph in 2020. But you can see there's zero wind in Japan at the top, and then solar has risen to 10% of electricity generation in Japan. Our first visit is to the world's largest floating solar power plant on the Yamakura Dam at Chiba in Japan. 132 hectares of 51,000 solar floating panels, but just for 14 megawatts. And this floating design facility has to also withstand through a very unique Japanese design anchoring and tethering system to secure the panels when a typhoon comes through and is not ripped apart. Our second visit in Japan is to Kagoshima and Nanachijima that you see here in southern Japan. And this was for quite a while the largest, but the significant piece of reality from this one is that it is built fully on reclaimed land. And the 70 megawatts that were designed to deal with the salt climate, to deal with typhoons, and today is a tourist facility and a solar science museum at their office. Our next visit is to Setouchi Kirei, and the reason why I showed this one of 235 megawatts is because it is been done so carefully to integrate with the surrounding landscape, to minimize visual impact, and to incorporate wildflower meadows and also bee conservation, which is so important in Japan. And the synergy between agricultural and management and environmental management of this is quite exceptional. We leave Japan by looking at the overall Japanese energy situation. And you can see here that the Japanese economy in terms of primary energy is dominated by oil, then coal, then gas. You can see the decline in nuclear in the middle right. And you can see that solar has now risen to 5% also of Japanese primary energy consumption. We travel south from Japan to Australia. Australia has exceptionally good solar, only really as a continent rivaled by Africa. Land is available, and Australia is building solar fast, and also probably more so significantly than any other country that I could name is expanding electricity storage to be able to keep up with the solar. And this picture here on top right shows that solar is still far behind coal and gas, almost approaching what gas contributes in terms of power generation. Renewables has overtaken gas, but you can see the absolutely steep decline of solar, that curve as more and more solar is installed in the country. We specifically do our first visit in South Australia because South Australia is a leader in solar power in Australia, and at the Adelaide airport, this solar facility of only 1.3 megawatts contributes to all solar days during the day in South Australia, a place that demonstrates the so-called duck curve quite profoundly. Our second visit is also an interesting one in my mind. That's in the same city of Adelaide, the IKEA solar panel and battery store. And what you see here on top of the IKEA store is 1.2 megawatts of solar panels. And this is integrated with a larger 3 megawatt microgrid. It is also installed a 3 megawatt hour battery, but it is being used as a hub for customers showcasing solar and battery technology through interactive displays and educational tours inside. And EV chargers are also being installed for customers and for co-workers and the delivery fleet of IKEA. I pause for a moment to look at storage in Australia, because Australia has very significant pumped and battery storage projects. The Snowy River project is under reconstruction and expansion in the southeast of the country. And top right in Queensland, the Pioneer Budekin pump storage station is being planned. And that will, if it goes ahead, be the largest pump storage station in terms of energy storage in the world. But you can also see in green all the battery storage projects which are either in operation, under construction, or announced. So Australia is setting the example for other countries in terms of storage to go with renewables. Overall, the Australian energy system that we see on screen still shows that coal and oil and gas dominate in the overall energy system. Solar, we can see top right is growing, and middle left, you can see wind is also growing, but still relatively small. To the north of Australia, we visit India next. India has very ambitious plans under Prime Minister Modi to expand solar power. You can see the solar farms across India. And there are two crucial issues for India. The one is the battle for land between energy and food, as I will demonstrate in a moment. But also, generally, the Indian view is that the low levels of employment creation from solar energy in the country with the largest population, and yes, India has more unemployed people than any other country in the world. So employment creation is very significant for India. In terms of where does India's electricity come from, we can see the domination of coal in black and above that hydro in light blue at the top. Solar has now risen to 5% of Indian generation. There is no Indian solar farm more looked at and studied than Badla. Badla sits here in the Thar Desert in Rajasthan. It's 2,200 megawatts currently being developed in many sections. The Thar Desert is notorious for high temperatures and extremely harsh conditions, and Badla demonstrates the market resilience and innovation in adapting to solar technology in challenging environments. And this park uses robotic cleaning systems and advanced monitoring technology for efficient panel maintenance and performance optimization at all times. But slightly as a contrast to Badla, we look at Kurnool in Andhra Pradesh in sort of central India. And what we see here is a very large solar farm of about 2,000 megawatts now, but changing sort of by the month. But this land had to be acquired from small and marginal farmers, and allegations of unfair competition, lack of proper consultation, inadequate rehabilitation support for displaced families have dogged the Kurnool plant. And there were also issues of deforestation to do this, and that the compensatory reforestation has not taken place. So one of the most controversial large solar farms in the world, I would say. We briefly go to northern India, to a place called Dera Baba Jamal, to see what was for a long time the largest rooftop solar facility in the world. And at those red 3 dots that you see is the Jamal, the Radha Swami sect, religious sect's headquarters, and their community hall on the left, and the accommodation quarters. And this at 12 megawatts was for quite a while the world's largest rooftop solar facility. We leave India by again just looking at their overall energy balance, and there you can see drawn to the same scale coal, oil, and gas at the bottom, and top right solar, 2% of primary energy in India. We go slightly west from India, where I've spent most of 2023, to the Middle East, because the large open spaces and high solar potential markets of the Middle East are ideal for solar power. And there are significant solar farms in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, in the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. The deserts are dusty, and we will ask the question and answer the question, is this mainstream or is this a distraction? Firstly, let's just look for the whole Middle East where the electricity comes from. And you can see over the past 20 years, not a lot has changed. Coal in black in the bottom is insignificant, mostly gas, some oil, and then some hydro, and 1% of the electricity in the Middle East comes from solar today. Let's visit a few of those solar farms, and we first go to some real UAE ambition, because the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum solar farm combines what you can see at the 6 red dots, both photovoltaic, but on the far right also concentrated solar power. And it's currently 2.6 gigawatts, and will probably, when all the bits have been filled in, be about 5 gigawatts by 2030. What is significant is that number that you see in the label top left. It achieved a price of 1.7 cents per kilowatt hour for the last phase 5 bid to do quite a record low. Our next visit is to Saudi Arabia, and you see here in the Saudi desert, in the north of the country, the Sakaka solar farm. And for Saudi Arabia, this is the shining example of their commitment to renewable energy. It was already built in 2020, was the first utility scale solar project in Saudi Arabia, 300 megawatt capacity. The Saudis publicly say that this comes in at a levelized cost of 2.3 American cents per kilowatt hour. And our third visit is to this not photovoltaic plant, but a steam generating plant built by Glasspoint in the Omani Desert for Petroleum Development Oman, which uses large curved mirrors located within greenhouses to boil water to produce steam for enhanced oil recovery in the Amal West oil field. And this is 7 megawatts thermal, but a breakthrough also in that part of the world in terms of thermal power, thermal generation. Overall, when we look at the Middle East in terms of primary energy consumption, you can see the way that oil bottom right and gas bottom left dominates, and solar, if one rounds it to the nearest integer is 0% of primary energy in the Middle East today. That brings me to where a number of our participants today are from Africa, to African solar power, because Africa has some unique electricity and energy supply challenges across the 54 countries in Africa. With the reality that 600 million people are still without electricity and 970 million without access to modern cooking fuel, and that the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, number 7, as targets have not been met. And as a result, Africa burns a equivalent in terms of wood in 10 million barrels per day, and more rapid deforestation than any other continent. At the same time, North Africa and Southern Africa have some of the best sunshine. And I predict and contend that the simplicity of solar, the abundance of sunshine, simplicity of solar from an engineering perspective, the abundance of sunshine, the presence of China in Africa is likely to result in very rapid growth across Africa in the future. Today, power generation in Africa is dominated by coal from South Africa, gas in Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt, and significant hydro on the Zambezi system, the Nile system, and other river systems. You see solar is 2% of power generation in Africa. Our first visit is in Morocco, on the northwest part of the continent, and here you see the world's largest concentrated solar plant. And the three phases on the left-hand side that Michael Cowboy was involved in and has given me the details of, produce concentrated heat and then power generates by day and also by night through its 7 hours of storage. And on the far right, you can see a conventional photovoltaic plant also that has been added as phase 4. This plant needs water to keep everything clean, and that's probably the main controversy around this plant. You can see the ponds on screen. We go to the northeastern part of Africa, to Ben Ban, and you look down on the 1,650 megawatt plant built up in 41 plots across the Egyptian southwestern desert. You can see that each one is mounted on a rotating axis to follow the sun. And these are ideal conditions for solar power generation. A major part of Egypt using gas power and wind, gas, solar, and wind for its electrical future. We stop over at Bayero University in Nigeria, northern Nigeria. And you see here the university in the background. In the foreground, you can see where the red dot is, the 5 megawatts of solar that it has there, but which needs to be backed up on site by backup generators and storage, because of the fact that the Nigerian power supply is so notoriously unreliable. Next, we travel to Kenya and look down at Devki Steel. Kenya is in a power crisis in terms of national blackouts, regional power outages, and rapidly rising electricity prices. Devki has decided to contract out of that with its rooftop installation of 4 megawatts that you see where that red dot is. And this is the largest rooftop solar power plant in East, West, and Central Africa, and is quite a success story in terms of collaboration between many parties to do that. And lastly, we travel all the way down to South Africa, country experiencing such severe load shedding now for 4 years. And the recently commissioned Kenhardt Solar, which is developed by Skytech of Norway. And what we see here on screen where the red dot is 540 megawatts of solar capacity on the left. And then the right-hand side, you see the 456 battery units, which together have a capacity of 225 megawatts, or 1 gigawatt hours of storage. By far the largest battery that you see in those white modules anywhere in Africa. and world scale in terms of its size. Overall, Africa now has, where you can look at the overall makeup of Africa. You can see that oil and coal and gas still dominate its energy system. Hydropower is significant. Solar now provides 1% of Africa's primary energy. We travel from Africa north directly across the Mediterranean to Europe. Despite the fact that Europe, as we saw in our opening slide, has poor sun, it has very significant installed solar capacity. And on screen, you see the solar farms across Ireland and the UK and also Belgium and the Netherlands. And bottom left, you can see the solar farms, Portugal and Spain and France. Germany dominates in Eastern Europe in terms of solar capacity quite clearly. And then you can see Italy and the Balkans and Turkey bottom. So in combination, significant solar across Europe. Let's first look at the European electricity system. And you can see here, solar is 5% of European electricity. And we travel to Spain first to look at a country which has some of the best solar conditions, especially in Southern Europe. And the Francisco Pizarro solar farm of 590 megawatts now provides offtake to 2 food companies via Iberdrola to supply their needs. Or we go to Germany, and below us we see the largest rooftop solar facility in Germany at the Goodyear Dunlop Center in Philipsburg, a total of 7 megawatts. But significantly constructed in just 4 months. Or we go across to the United Kingdom, and here you see Bentley Motors, also 5 megawatts of rooftop solar, largest single rooftop in the United Kingdom as part of dealing with their overall carbon footprint. I show this graph for a moment to remind ourselves. Top left, you can see in the month of November last year, the daily contribution to the UK in terms of solar. And on the right hand side, you can see over the year of 2022, you can see the solar generation on a daily basis is now seasonal, and it is with very little coming in the summer. In France, France has the largest floating solar farm looking for land. This is a total of 17 megawatts peak floating in France. This is an old Air Force base in France at Taux-Rosières, where sheep now graze under solar panels of 115 megawatts run by EDF Renewables. And overall, the European primary energy makeup is quite astounding still. You can see the significant roles of gas and oil, coal being phased out, hydropower flat, nuclear declining, and solar and wind rising in an overall makeup. That takes us across the Atlantic to the United States. And you see the solar farms across the United States, the eastern states. There's a layout over the sea to just make it clearer, and also for California. And what is very clear is how prolific the Mohave Desert in Southern California is in terms of supplying Southern California Edison with solar power. But it is worth commenting on the recently adopted Inflation Reduction Act of President Biden, because that act specifically for solar power provides for enhanced tax credits to homeowners and businesses for installing solar, production tax credits for solar powered energy for energy companies and power utilities, a significant set of tax credits and grants for domestic solar panel manufacturing to protect it against China, a low-income housing tax credit for installed solar-powered home electrification credits, solar research funding, and streamlined permitting for solar farms and rooftop installations. And controversially, the offers do not include panels, if installed, produced by forced labor, which is kind of an oblique reference to the Western Uyghur matter in China, but a clear protectionist measure against panels produced in China and to be installed in the United States. Overall, you can see that gas drives the US power system, and that solar has now risen to 5%. If we say, what does that mean on a daily basis? You can see quite clearly here that solar at the bottom is actually quite a wide profile because of the time difference between the East Coast and the West Coast. So sun shines across the United States for 3 hours longer than most other countries. And you can see at the top how natural gas keeps the system together across the country in view of the fact that there's so little both pump storage and battery storage available in the United States. Our first visit is to Ivanpah concentrated solar. This was one of the world's first large-scale concentrated solar plants. You can see the 3 phases on the left. You can see actually that in that white shaded area how the sun is being reflected. Sun comes in from the left, is reflected back onto the sodium towers in the middle. An impressive 173,000 mirrors. Together they generate 392 megawatts. And Ivanpah employs very advanced tracking systems and multi-installed storage technology to experiment with this, but not a lot of CSP is being built in the United States anymore. It's now PV and batteries. And top right, you can see a conventional PV system. Next, we go to Southern California, and each of the red dots are simply there to draw your attention to the fact that there are multiple solar farms being built in parallel in the southern Mohave Desert. And California is setting the pace for the other states in the United States, and no other area in the USA has seen the growth in solar like this has. Our next stop is also for those who are always looking for first or biggest in the world. This is in California at the Westmont rooftop solar facility. And this is the largest rooftop solar facility at 16 megawatts, not only in the United States, but also in the world. And that record is being pushed, I have to say, every month or two these days, but somebody going bigger than the previous. But Westmont also serves as an innovation hub and testing ground for solar technologies and smart grids and energy solutions overall. The overall makeup of the US primary energy system, you can see the domination of oil in the United States, the love of cars and transportation, and then gas and coal at the bottom. You can see that solar has now risen to 2% of US total energy consumption. Our last visit is in South America to Chile. Chile has wonderful solar conditions, probably along with Namibia and the parts of Australia, the best in the world, as we saw on the map earlier. And the desert has almost unlimited space for solar. And there's a north-south transmission system available in the country. And we can see where the tiles are, all the solar farms being built north to south in the country. You can see how steep the Chilean system and how quickly that is changing. Solar is now 17% of their power system, and we visit the largest in Chile, Campos del Sol Solar, which is built right. You can see the Atacama Desert around it, 570 megawatts. And it has really done a lot to involve local communities in terms of educational programs, employment opportunities, skills training, promoting overall sustainable development and environmental considerations. It requires water, and the farm employs a lot of water saving measure, but in a very dry place where people need water, that remains controversial. Overall, the Chilean energy system, which is oil dominated, now sees 7% of its primary energy coming from solar. That concludes our tour, but let's just do some takeaways. The first part is world solar installed capacity over the past decade has really only ramped up in the past 10 years. as panels became cheaper and became available from China. We can see in total there's now 1,200 gigawatts of installed capacity. And those 1,200 gigawatts of installed capacity today, as far as world power generation is concerned, provide 5% of world power. And as far as the overall world primary energy is concerned, bigger than electricity, you see that solar today produces 2% of world primary energy. And that leaves me then to conclude and say, what would be the takeaways from our tour? The first one is that there's been, as we just saw, absolutely rapid growth in utility and distributed rooftop solar. And there's a further doubling of capacity to more than 2 terawatt hours, a terawatt of capacity in the next 5 years. And that currently the panel capacity is bigger than demand, so it's not demand constrained. The low efficiency of only 23% and low solar intensities, which yield only 700 to 1,000 kilowatt hours per square meter, results in battles for land in many highly populated areas in the northern hemisphere specifically. Publicly, there is a preference for solar to onshore wind specifically for the greater invisibility and positive association with the sun of solar. And permitting globally is far easier and faster for solar than for wind. China dominates solar panel manufacturing, with the USA, Canada, Japan, and South Korea desperately trying to catch up. Solar, with its 25% load factors, requires storage, either or gas-fired power to deal with the intermittency. But battery capacity in the world is lagging a decade behind, and could never catch up with the way that solar is growing. And lastly, what are the big constraints to solar growth? Poor sunshine in the global north, the Western protectionist policies that I spoke of earlier, the 20 to 25% power load factor at maximum driven by sunshine, the cost of storage, and the availability of land as solar grows. With that, Mary, back to you.